Well, I think we're going to get started because we're going to have a wonderful evening. I want to welcome you to tonight's workshop on Mindful Nature Connection, which is being led by Micah Mortali. You're going to hear more about him later. Before I proceed, I want to ask everyone to please keep their microphones muted. We will do some breakout sessions. Obviously, you can talk during that. And then we're going to have an opportunity to ask questions and have discussion following Micah's presentation. My name is Debbie Kornman. I'm the Associate Director of InCHIP, which is the Institute for Collaboration on Health Intervention and Policy. For those who don't know about InCHIP, it's a multidisciplinary institute that supports health behavior research across the university. And for UConn researchers, this is really a one-stop shop that provides support and assistance from the conception of our research idea to applying for a grant and then implementing the funded study. And we offer a variety of services, including training, such as in grant writing and different methodologies. And we help researchers find collaborators at UConn and in the communities so that they can build their research team. We do targeted funding searches for faculty. We are also willing to find experts to review grant proposals before they're submitted. Importantly, we offer seed grant funding twice a year so that researchers can collect the pilot data they need to make their external grant applications more competitive. And we have this wonderful grants management team that assists with budget preparation and grant submissions so that PIs can focus on the science rather than on the forms and red tape and bureaucracy. And then once a grant is awarded, our team helps manage the budget, and they assist with personnel hiring, grant-related travel, and setting up subcontracts, and they do budget projections as well. We also have a virtual lecture series that features renowned researchers from around the country, and we sponsor anywhere from 12 to 15 lectures a year. We have, InCHIP includes 3 centers: the Rudd Center for Food Policy and Health, the Center for Health and Social Media, and the Collaboratory on School and Child Health. We also have 8 research interest groups, each of which is multidisciplinary and focused on a different health domain, ranging from aging to cancer to gun violence prevention to obesity to mind-body health, which is what this research interest group is. The Mind-Body Health Research Interest Group is the one who has organized and hosted this wonderful workshop. If you're not currently a member of the InCHIP network, I encourage you to join. Whether you work at UConn or outside UConn, there are benefits if you're outside UConn as well. Just go to our website at inchip.uconn.edu and fill out the application form. There's no cost to joining. There's no cost to participating. And by becoming a member, you'll be kept informed of all of our events, funding opportunities, and resources. That was a mouthful. I'm now going to turn this over to Melissa Bray, who is a professor of school psychology here at UConn and one of the co-chairs of the Mind-Body Health Research Interest Group.
Thank you, and thanks for supporting this, InCHIP. I'm Melissa Bray. I'm a professor and director of the school psychology program on the Storrs campus, and I'm just going to take a brief moment to introduce the board members of the Mind-Body Health Research Intensive Group, and they're all here tonight. Dr. Mary Guerrera, who is a physician and professor emeritus with family medicine at UConn Health. We also have Dr. Sandra Bushmick, who's a veterinarian and associate dean for academic programs in the College of Agricultural Health and Natural Resources on the Storrs campus. Dr. Anna Verissimo, a physician, retired assistant professor of pediatrics at Connecticut Children's Medical Center. And we also have, I'd like to introduce Sierra Trudell, who's a doctoral candidate in school psychology. She's the director of the Mind-Body Health Bray Lab, and she's also assisting tonight. Thank you for all your help, Sierra. Okay, that's it. I'll make it quick so we can move along, and the next person can take over.
You're muted, Mary.
All right, how's that?
Better.
Okay, wonderful. All right, so hi, I'm Dr. Mary Guerrera, and I have the pleasure of doing our land acknowledgement this evening. Welcome, everyone. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the territory of the Mohegan, the Mashantucket Pequot, the Eastern Pequot, the Sachatakok, the Golden Hill Pagosset, the Nipmuc, and the Lenape peoples who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We thank them for their strength and their resilience in protecting this land and aspire to uphold our responsibilities according to their example. So thank you, and I'll now pass it along to Dr. Sandy Bushmick.
Hi, welcome. I'm Dr. Sandy Bushmick from the UConn's College of Agriculture, Health, and Natural Resources. I've been also studying energy medicine for many years. I can't figure out how many. In many cultures, it's traditional to begin gatherings with a ceremony, to invite spirit, however you might envision spirit to be, to join us and support us. This is called opening space. So please take a moment to relax, get comfortable, open your heart and mind, and I will lead us in opening the space. To the winds of the south, great serpent, wrap your coils of light around us. Teach us to shed the past the way you shed your skin, all at one time. Teach us to walk softly on the earth. Show us the beauty way. Aho. To the winds of the west, mother, sister, jaguar, protect our medicine space. Show us the way beyond death, the way across the rainbow bridge. Teach us to walk with impeccability and integrity through the forest, through the jungle. Show us the way of fearlessness. Aho. The winds of the north, hummingbird, grandmothers, grandfathers, ancient ones, lineage. Come warm your hands by our fires. Come whisper to us in the wind. Share your wisdom with us. We honor you who have come before us, and you who will come after us, children's children. Aho. To the winds of the east, great eagle, condor, come to us from the place of the rising sun. Teach us to fly wing to wing with the Great Spirit. Show us the mountains we only dare to dream of. Show us the high view where everything mundane goes, aho. Pachamama, Mother Earth, we come here to honor all your children. The stone people, the plant people, the water people, the fire people, the wind people, the two-legged, the four-legged, the many-legged, the no-legged, the winged ones, the finned, the furred, the feathered, the scaled, the hairless. All our beloved brothers and sisters, all our beloved relations. Aho. Grandfather Sun, Grandmother Moon, Star Nation, Star Brothers, Star Sisters, Great Spirit, you who are known by 1,000 names, yet you who remain the unnameable one. Thank you, thank you, thank you for letting us come together on this day one more time. Aho. Aho. Can't see without my glasses. Who's next? Sierra.
It's me. Thank you so much for that, Sandy. Well, I have the great honor and privilege of introducing our speaker, Micah Mortali. So Micah is the founder of the Crapalo School of Mindful Outdoor Leadership, and he's the author of Rewilding. Micah's life work is about helping modern humans reconnect with their deeper, truer selves through mindfulness, rewilding, and immersion in the natural world. Micah is a lifelong student of the world's great spiritual traditions. In his 20s, Micah was a wilderness counselor and outdoor educator with young adults, guiding backcountry expeditions on land and water. And for the past 16 years, Micah has been leading retreats, trainings, and programs at Kripalu. Micah was the director of the Kripalu schools for 7 years. And it was during this period he was inspired to create the groundbreaking Kripalu School of Mindful Outdoor Leadership and write the book Rewilding: Meditations, Practices, and Skills for Awakening in Nature. Micah holds a master's degree in health arts and sciences and is dedicated to the idea that human beings are self-aware expression of the living earth, and that our future depends on awakening to this reality and remembering how to communicate more effectively with the systems that govern life on this planet. Micah, thank you so much for being here tonight. We are all very excited to learn from you and to have you guide us tonight, and I will pass it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sierra. And Sandy, thanks for that beautiful opening. That would really touch me.
Oh,
It's great to be here with all of you. Thanks for having me. As I was listening to all of you speak, and the land acknowledgement and the opening, and just hearing Mohegan and Pequot again, I grew up in Connecticut and on those lands, and grew up right on the banks of the Connecticut River where it meets Long Island Sound and Old Lyme. And just being with you all tonight and hearing things from Connecticut just really warmed my heart and reminded me of where I come from and my home. So I'm really glad to be here with you all tonight. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'll get my slide deck going. So just give me one moment here to get that going. There we go. Right. Can you see the rainbow? Yeah, good. Okay. Awesome. So we're here tonight and gathered to talk about mindful nature connection and the relationship between this word mindfulness, which we've all heard a million times probably over the last couple decades. It's a concept that's become more part of our daily lives, which is an amazing thing. And how mindfulness connects to the natural world and the great outdoors, or as I like to refer to it, the living earth, more than human world. The tagline for tonight is surviving Zoom and nature deficit disorder. So, well, surviving WebEx, okay, specifically for tonight, and nature deficit disorder. Over the last couple of years, we've all been spending even more time looking at screens and engaging with technology than we were before that which shall not be named. So I hope that what I have to share tonight is supportive for all of you, and that you will be able to walk away with some concrete practices and skills that will really be supportive. So let's get started. Yeah, so thank you for that beautiful introduction. Not much more I'd really like to add. There's a picture of me playing with fire. Growing up in Connecticut, as a little one, I was, I guess, what you'd call now a free range kid. So I had a lot of freedom growing up in the 80s to roam the woods unsupervised and climb trees and explore caves. And I was a big bow and arrow fan as a kid. I still am an archer and love to shoot bow and arrow, love to be outside, love to hug trees, love to camp and hike, and live up here in the Berkshires of Western Mass, in beautiful, beautiful place up here. My family, my wife, and my kids. So this is my home now. Really connected with this place, and the land I'm living on up here is the ancestral homelands of the Stockbridge, Muncie band of Mohicans. The Mohican people, not the Mohegan. That's the Mohicans are one tribe. The Mohicans are a different tribe, and so made famous by James Fenimore Cooper's book, The Last of the Mohicans. But the Mohicans are very alive and well, and their federally recognized tribal lands are actually now in Wisconsin. Like many of the eastern tribes, they were moved west in the 1820s when during the Indian Removal Act. But the Mohican people have lands in Wisconsin, and I've been very fortunate to get to know some Mohican people who actually come back to the Berkshires and visit. Actually, one gentleman, Sean Stevens, is faculty in our School for Mindful Outdoor Leadership and comes and teaches about his people here. So I love where I live, not too far from you all, just a little bit north and west. Yeah, a couple years ago, I started a new program here at Kripalu, School of Mindful Outdoor Leadership. And, basically what that was all about, being a free range kid growing up in Connecticut, I just found myself out there a lot. And once I got into, elementary school, my folks divorced when I was young. And I had some, childhood had some challenges in going into adolescence. And what happened was that I found myself going out into the woods and going down to the Connecticut River and basically going to nature as without even realizing it as a way of caring for myself, as a self-care practice. The woods were where I felt most myself, felt most at ease. When I was climbing a tree, I felt safe, good. And that was always the case. And as I got older, high school, college, I found myself really starting to reflect on the deeper questions of life, I guess you could say. Who are we? What are we as human beings? Like, really, what are we? How did we get here? Why are we here? What's it all about? And I actually was an undergrad religious studies major at Connecticut College in New London and studied the world religions. But I was always going back and forth between sitting in a tree and, reading a sacred text or doing yoga or meditating. And so in my early 20s, as Sierra said, I went down to the Smoky Mountains of North Carolina and was a wilderness counselor with at-risk teens, did that for 3 years. Very rugged experience, great learning experience. And that's where I really fell in love with yoga when I was down there. And yoga became this other practice that allowed me to self-regulate my nervous system, to experience, I would call it alternate states of awareness through breathing and meditative postures. I found it to be really powerful. What I really loved about yoga was that it was one of these, it was a tradition that actually had experiential practices that allowed one to have a direct experience of an altered state, which I found fascinating and pulled me deeper. So heard about Kripalu Center, which is the largest yoga-based retreat center in North America up here in the Berkshires. Eventually came up here and did a yoga teacher training, a month-long immersion in the practice. And later came back and was a volunteer, washed dishes here. But while I was here washing dishes as a volunteer, doing a lot of yoga, I started wandering off in the woods. And what I found was that the practice of cultivating mindfulness, of being present, of breathing and being aware of my body and being aware of my senses made my walks in the woods almost overwhelming, awe-inspiring. The trees, the rocks, the streams, it was so beautiful. And I started to see that there was a way that mindful meditative practices could support a deepening of relationship with the natural world. And so I got very curious about that. And over the years, I would pitch different ideas to Kripalu, but at the time I was a dishwasher and then a yoga teacher and then a manager. Over 12 years, I ended up being the director of the schools and running the major schools here. And it was at that point that I was like, okay, now I have the opportunity to actually do something to break down the separation between people in the natural world. And it kind of dawned on me when I was at a yoga journal conference in Manhattan. And Yoga Journal Conference is probably what you'd imagine it to be. So 14th floor of the Midtown Hilton, big room, 200 yogis in there. Everybody's wearing spandex and no windows, jumping around on rubber yoga mats. And it just kind of hit me like how much more disconnected from the natural world could we get? Like we could be doing yoga on the International Space Station right now, and we wouldn't really know the difference, which is kind of strange because, the Buddha awakened sitting underneath an ancient fig tree in the forest. Jesus of Nazareth went out and did a 40-day fast in the desert before beginning his ministry. So I would say all of the traditions that I studied, the ancient wisdom traditions, came from people contemplating the wisdom of the natural world, going out to the edges of human society to where the wild things are, and being inspired by those experiences. And I thought it was strange that this practice, which was so nature sourced, yoga, had become this almost entirely indoor experience. And I wanted to do something. So went back to school and focused on the connection between mindfulness and the natural world. And wrote a book called Rewilding. And here we are tonight, and it's been a great adventure to lead this school. We're so far, in just the last 2 years of running it, we have about 350 mindful outdoor guides working in their communities, helping modern humans to begin to really connect with the natural world. So it's a ton of fun, really having a good time with it. I thought we would start tonight with a little exercise that could give us all a chance to reflect a little bit on the ways that we've connected with the spirit of place and the land. This is a quote from an author named Robert Michael Pyle, who wrote a book called The Thunder Tree. I think I came across this quote for the first time when I was reading a book called Last Child in the Woods by Richard Louv, which we'll get to a little. But I want to invite you right now to just, we're going to do a little centering, and I'll read you this quote. So you can close your eyes if that's comfortable, or if you want to look out of a window, you can do that. We'll kind of center and settle in here. So just closing your eyes or gazing out the window. And as you're ready, inviting a soft breath in through the nose and letting it out through the mouth with a sigh or a sound. Just doing that a couple more times. Breathing in and breathing out. Breathing in, just feeling the breath. As you breathe out, just letting go. As we breathe in, receiving the gift of life in the body, and as we breathe out, letting go of the control of all the things we can't control. With each exhale, feeling your body softening and settling into the support of your seat. Forehead and eyes and jaw softening. Letting go of whatever happened today. Let go of whatever is up ahead. Just for a few moments, allowing yourself to just be and just feel. Just noticing how you're feeling tonight. I'm just going to share this quote. You can just let the words wash over. A ditch somewhere, or a creek, meadow, woodlot, or marsh. These are places of initiation, where the borders between ourselves and other creatures break down, where the earth gets under our skin, the sense of place gets under our nails. Everybody has a ditch, or ought to, for only the ditches in the fields, woods, ravines teach us enough care for all the land. I want to invite you right now just to open your awareness to a place, a ditch, stream, tree, woodlot, marsh. Place where you first really connected with the land. Place that you bonded to at some point. Maybe in an initial place of connection with you. And just allowing a few rounds of breath with whatever arises as you open to that. And I'll read the quote one more time. A ditch somewhere, or a creek, meadow, woodlot, marsh. These are places of initiation. Borders between ourselves and other creatures break down, where the earth gets under our nails and a sense of place gets under our skin. Everybody has a ditch, or ought to. Only the ditches in the fields, woods, the ravines, can teach us to care enough for. Let's take a big breath in. Let it go. As you're ready, opening your eyes, coming back. And we're going to begin with a breakout room. And we're going to go in for 10 minutes. You're going to be in a group of 4 people. And we invite you to share with your group about your place, your ditch. You'll each have about 2.5 minutes to share about your experience. And so if somebody could just keep track of time, and at the end of the 10 minutes, we'll come back together. So let's talk a little bit about this idea of nature deficit disorder. This is a term that I first came upon when I read Richard Louve's book, Last Child in the Woods. The subtitle is Saving Our Children from Nature Deficit Disorder. And this term, nature deficit disorder, when I first heard it, really stopped me in my tracks. And the definition as he described it in the book is, nature deficit disorder describes the human cost of alienation from nature. Among them, diminished use of the senses, attention difficulties, and higher rates of physical and emotional illnesses. All right. So this book came out in 2006, and kind of ironically was almost the same year that the iPhone was introduced. So I heard about this book in 2009, 2010. And I'm sure, like many of you, was beginning to notice an acceleration in something in the social fabric. As I was observing myself and others, I was noticing that the disconnection from the natural world seemed to be accelerating and somehow deepening. And when I heard this term, I was like, oh, okay, that's helpful to have a term to think about this gestalt of all the ramifications of people spending more time on computers, less time outside. Okay? And so alienation from nature leading to things like a diminished use of our senses, which is sometimes referred to as sensory anesthesia. If we think about our senses, our senses developed outdoors. Our senses developed being exposed to wide varieties of temperature and humidity. Our senses were exposed to a variety of textures, a variety of sounds, a variety of flavors and smells. There's so much more sensory stimulation to be experienced outside than there is in this room I'm in right now, or probably the room you're in. The amount of surface area in an average office is like 1,000 times less than what you'd find in the same amount of surface area out in a forest. So this idea that our senses are kind of being diminished when we're inside a lot. And then along with that, of course, is this whole idea of attention difficulty. So people struggling to hold their focus, the attention span getting shorter, something Louvre attributes to major deficit disorder. And certainly we know that human attention spans have been shrinking. I can remember growing up in the early 80s and watching MTV and people saying, God, these kids, they can't watch a whole half-hour show. They can only sit through a 3-minute video. But eventually the attention spans got so short that they wouldn't even show you a whole 3-minute video on MTV. Well, back when MTV used to show music videos. That just shows how old I am. So we've all probably seen this. And, many of you, I'm sure, probably late in the afternoon, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, you might notice like a drop off in your ability to stay on task with a given project you might be working on. That relates to directed attention fatigue. We're going to talk about that in a little while as well. And then higher rates of physical and emotional illnesses. So as we're seeing more and more people migrating indoors and migrating out of rural areas into urban areas, being more sedentary, not necessarily moving as much, maybe not eating as well, a whole host of physical and emotional illnesses. And, title of my book is Rewilding. And rewilding relates to all this because it's based on this idea that as human beings, we have more or less become domesticated. And what domesticated means is of the house. Look at the root of the word, domestico, means of the house. So most modern humans spend most of their time in a house. In the same way that like a Jack Russell, unlike a wolf, spends most of its life in a house. And like a Jack Russell, most of us know where our next meal is coming from. And like a Jack Russell, we probably didn't hunt and gather it, right? So in a lot of ways, we've become less like a wolf and more like a Jack Russell as human beings. And that's not necessarily a negative thing. There's a lot of great stuff that comes with that. But there's also a lot that maybe we've lost. Maybe there's some important connections that we've lost as well. So you might imagine that there's a lioness who lives in the open plains of southern Africa. And she lives with her pride. And during the days, she's out on the open land, under the sun, with her community. And with her pride, she's out and she hunts and she brings food back to the pride. And at night, she sleeps under the stars and she drinks fresh, clean water out of the river. She gets tons of physicality every day. And she's mated and she's in a very dynamic environment. And what she does contributes to the good of the pride. And let's say that then we take her, we rescue her from that wild situation. We get her a really nice open floor plan, well-appointed apartment in an urban area in the United States. And we get her a treadmill so she can get her steps in, and a Zoom account so she can keep in touch with the pride, keep up with what's going on. And we get her a food subscription plan. She gets like fresh zebra, just shipped in right to her door. We get her one of those medical subscription plans where you can talk to your doctor, right over the video chat. And we get her Netflix for Lions. So she's got like educational and entertaining programming just for her. And we checked in on her in a couple of years. You know, she might not be, you know, the most fulfilled, happiest lion because there's other parts of her that just aren't being nourished or supported. So this is this idea of human rewilding. Like maybe we're a little bit like that lioness, and maybe some of what's ailing us might have something to do with the fact that we have been removed from our natural habitat. In the same way that wild animals can often become or show signs of depression, mental illness when they're put in a zoo. Sometimes some people postulate, you know, maybe some of what's going on for human beings is nature deficit disorder. So I did some research while I was building up school and writing the book on, you know, how nature disconnected have we become? And so these are some statistics I've gotten. I have the links to the sources, which I can post into the chat after the presentation. But in the late 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, when the internet first came out. So just think like You've Got Mail, right? Tom Hanks, Meg Ryan, everybody was excited because email would be better because you just have to send a quick note and then you wouldn't have to spend as much time on the phone listening to voicemails. Do you remember that? So back then, you might have seen stories about internet addiction. This was also the time when folks had internet cafes, and you know, young people would go to these internet cafes and they'd be gone all week. So at that time, there were stories about internet addiction, and it was considered to be about 40 to 80 hours a week of internet uses be considered internet addiction. So fast forward to today, especially since the iPhone came online, the average American now spends 11 hours a day on the screen. So that's a pre-COVID statistic, so it's probably higher at this point. But that's about 77 hours a week on average. So basically every American on average is now an internet addict. Look at the 90s, 40 to 80 hour measure. Americans spend over 90% of their lives indoors. That's an EPA statistic. They were wanting to measure how important is indoor air quality on human health. And so they had to figure out, well, how much are we breathing in? So more than 90% of our lives. Children in the United States spend 8 hours a day on media outside of school. So if you're in school for 6 hours a day, you're on media for 8 hours a day, hopefully you're sleeping for 8 hours. That leaves 2 hours a day that you're not basically on technology. Of course, you know, during COVID, when kids were remote learning, they were on a screen all day in school, that was compounded. Here's a kind of a shocking one. 3/4 of kids in the United Kingdom spend less time outside than prison inmates. The United Nations says that prisoners have to get an hour of fresh air exercise a day. And I'm sure probably some of us, many of us probably don't get that every day. So there's that. That's not very much time. And meanwhile, of course, this is also a pre-COVID statistic, 2.5 million American kids suffering from depression and anxiety. I think that number's tripled over the last 2 years because of all the COVID measures. So there is an effect. Nature disconnection, technology, on how we're living, what a normal day looks like for us compared to maybe how it looked for a generation or two prior. The good news is that there's a lot of really positive research out there that shows that nature time is incredibly beneficial for health and well-being. This is stuff that we've known, most of us intuitively, and certainly more nature-based cultures have known forever. But it's great that we actually have some scientific research now that shows this to be true. So about 2 years ago, there was a study that came out of the UK that showed that 120 minutes in nature per week correlated with statistically higher physical and psychological health. And that became known as like the new 10,000 steps. right? So most folks know I'm going to try to get my 10,000 steps in today. If you can get 2 hours minimum of nature time every week, you can break it up, as much as you want to, 2 1-hour walks or 4 half-hour walks, going to have a really powerful positive impact on your health and well-being. There's some studies that have shown that children who grow up close to green spaces seem to have a buffer against mental illness in adulthood. Living close to green spaces as a child basically helps you be more resilient to stressful events in general, which is really cool. And also kind of upsetting as well, because knowing that there's just so many communities and children who don't have access to green space and therefore aren't getting that benefit. But a window that looks out on green spaces has been shown to have a really positive outcome on surgery. So Robert Ulrich did some really interesting studies, showed that, if you've had surgery and you have a room that has a window and you can look out, you're going to get out of the hospital sooner, use less opioid-based pain medication, and you'll have more positive notes from your nurse, so you'll be kind of more cheerful. That study was done because there was a prison where half the prison had rooms that looked out on a brick wall, and the other half of the prison had windows that looked out over green space. And the brick wall side was in the infirmary 20% more than the other side. And that got researchers thinking about wanting to know why that was. Some of you, I'm sure many of you, have probably heard of the practice of forest bathing, Shinrin Yoku, which comes out of Japan. And we are very grateful to the researchers in Japan and South Korea who've done a lot of research on the effects of forest bathing. And I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. But basically, a very short 45-minute relaxed stroll through an evergreen forest is incredible health benefit. So the stress hormone cortisol drops 14%. The natural killer cell counts in the blood, which are part of our immune response, increase. So a boost to our immune function as a result of a walk in the forest. Decreased heart rate and blood pressure, elevated mood, improved sleep. There's all these incredible benefits. It has to do with breathing in the phytoncide, the essential oil compounds, or the volatile organic compounds that the evergreen trees are pumping into the forest atmosphere. So you're breathing in pinene, limonene, terpene, that Christmas tree smell. Breathing that in has this amazing positive effect on us. And then, there's really cool research, which I'm going to talk about tonight. Rachel and Stephen Kaplan, these environmental psychologists at the University of Michigan, developed something called attention restoration theory, where they show that just looking out a window helps us recover from prolonged focus, what they call directed attention fatigue, helps us be more productive. I'm going to get into that as well. So, when we think about Zoom fatigue and working with having so much technology in our lives, and we think about ways that we can sort of help to offset the negative impacts of technology and nature disconnection, we want to lead off thinking a little bit about mindfulness. Now, mindfulness has a lot of different definitions. And one of the more common definitions is by Jon Kabat-Zinn, where he defines it as paying attention on purpose with an attitude of curiosity. Paying attention on purpose with an attitude of curiosity. Now, the word mindfulness actually comes from a Pali word, sati. What sati means is remembering, recollecting. So mindfulness means to remember. And what we're remembering is what we're doing. Remembering the present moment. Remembering to come into the now. Now, modern mindfulness, Jon Kabat-Zinn's definition, is a willful practice. paying attention on purpose with an attitude of curiosity. And when we do that, we're pulling our attention out of the future, out of the past. We're recollecting ourselves, coming back to. We do that, nature gains so much more. Of course, children, and I love this photo because these kids, you can tell they're being very mindful. They're absorbed in what they're doing, but they're not trying to pay attention. They don't look like they are. They don't look like they're trying to pay attention on purpose or trying to be curious. They just look like they genuinely are curious. And that's because they're in a fascinating environment. They're looking at something interesting. So this is where we get into what I like to call natural. And Thich Nhat Hanh defines mindfulness as awakening to the reality of the present. These little kids right there, they're awakening to the beauty of that little critter that they're looking at. Reality of the present. Pastor Thich Nhat Hanh just left this body a couple months ago, one of the great teachers of mindfulness and a true lover of nature and of the earth. So mindfulness can be this vehicle when we remember where we are, remember what we're doing, remember our breath. We're here and we're present. We look out the window and we can see the world with beginner's eyes, beginner's mind. Then we see a tree, but maybe we see deeper into the tree. Maybe we see beyond the word tree as we look out over this expanse in this slide, over the contours of the body of the living earth. We see the clouds and we see the sky. In a mindful state, we might not even put all those words and labels on it. You might just open to the miracle of it. Wonder. This really, I think, is one of the great beauties of the practice. So Yoshifumi Miyazaki is one of the lead researchers in the forest bathing world. He's really put out, I think, the most research on the practice of forest bathing. And he just sums all of this up so simply. He says, throughout our evolution, we've spent 99.9% of our time in nature. Physiology is still adapted to it. So during everyday life, a feeling of comfort can be achieved if our rhythms are synchronized with those of the. And of course, I think we all know this is true, right? We didn't evolve sitting in chairs. We didn't evolve at tables. We didn't evolve under fluorescent lights or staring at a flat screen 2 feet in front of our face for 8 hours a day. This isn't what the body is for. Physiology is still adapted to nature. So if during everyday life, we can begin to bring our rhythms into harmony with those in the environment, as Aki says, a feeling of comfort can be achieved. So one of the really wonderful ways to do that is just to look out the window once in a while. This is one of the big prescriptions that I'm going to offer for surviving Zoom. It's looking out the window, going for a walk, sitting outside. These are 3 things we can do that are so simple and are going to have a really profound effect on. Now, living in the present moment, being in the present moment, being mindful is something that we now practice in modern life because of the way that our lives are constructed. But James Sussman, who's an anthropologist and spent a lot of time with the San people, who are a hunter-gatherer culture in Southern Africa, he realized that they had a completely different sense and experience of time. So he says it's one of the big differences between us and hunter-gatherer cultures. And he's amazed that more anthropologists haven't written about it. So he says everything in our lives is kind of future-oriented. For example, we might get a college degree so we can get a job, so we get a pension. For farmers, it was the same way. They planted seeds for the harvest and to store. But for hunter-gatherers, everything was present-oriented. All their effort was focused on meeting an immediate need. They were absolutely confident that they would be able to get food from their environment when they needed it. So they didn't waste time storing or growing food. This lifestyle created a very different perspective. And this kind of gets to sort of back now, a little bit about my theory, or it's kind of how I see mindfulness, which is that when you and I are immersed in our natural habitat, when we're at the beach, and you're sitting in your beach chair and you got your feet in the sand and you're looking out at the ocean and the waves just kind of coming in and coming out. You don't need to really practice mindfulness in that situation because the environment is so engaging, so fascinating and beautiful that we can't really help but just be taken in. Whereas when we're in an office, let's say, or maybe an artificial environment, and our environment isn't quite as fascinating or engaging, it's not our natural habitat, we might need to like really consciously practice mindfulness. So it may be that a big part of the practice has to do with our environment more than anything else. So it can be really helpful to get ourselves into those environments where we can find ourselves naturally, which could include just looking out the window. Now, we know there's all kinds of benefits to mindfulness. I mean, I love The Far Side. Tragedy struck when Conroy, his mind preoccupied with work, stepped into the elevator directly between a female grizzly. So when we're mindful, we're going to be more skillful because we're paying attention, we're present, and we can therefore make choices, take actions that are going to be in harmony with our environment based on wise, discerning. So certainly it can help us not walk between a mother bear and her cubs. But it's also been shown to boost our immune function, to mitigate depression and anxiety and chronic pain, and make us more resilient and recover faster from negative events. So mindfulness is a great practice. And when we bring mindfulness to nature, basically what we're doing is we are raising our awareness. Mindfulness makes us more aware when we're present. And the more present we are, the less of a disturbance. You're walking through the woods and you're mindful of your breath, you're sensing your environment, calm and relaxed. And you're going to probably step on fewer twigs, you're going to make less noise, you're going to blend more into that environment. Your parasympathetic nervous system is activated, you're in that rest and digest mode when you're mindful. You're not transmitting, you're not putting out there fight or flight energy. Relaxed, you're centered. And we can accelerate this mindfulness practice in nature with specific practices like deep breathing, mindful stretching, ways of walking, ways of opening our senses. But it all adds up to like more connection, greater sense of intimacy. And it might also even lead to like a little bit of a feeling of being in relationship with place. As you listen to the wind blow through the trees and feel a connection to that tree, it might begin to feel like less of a one-way, more of a two-way experience. Martin Buber, one of my favorite philosophers, put it this way, like he would call it moving into an I and thou relationship. In the West, it's easy for us, I think, to get into I-it relationships. And even in English, we would refer to a tree, a rock, or an animal, oftentimes that's an it. Oh, there's a fox over there. Did you see it? But if it was a person over there, you wouldn't say, oh, there's a person over there. Did you see it? You'd say, did you see them? But if it's a fox, we say it's an it. So that's one way that the English language objectifies anything that's not a Homo sapien. So we, through mindfulness, can enter into more of an I and thou relationship where we see the divine, or we see the sacred, or we see the we might just see the sacredness, the miracle of another manifestation of life force. Fox, tree, stone, stream. and not objectify them. One of my favorite practices for moving out of a fight or flight way of being, or even just at the end of a long day or from stress, just a very simple practice. I've been teaching yoga meditation for a good amount of time now. This is about 17 or 18 years, and I've learned a lot of different breath practices and exercises. But the one I teach everybody that I find the simplest and most effective is called the long exhale. And basically what it is you take a breath in through your nose. And then you let the exhale be at least twice as long as the inhale. And what that does is almost immediately, it triggers the parasympathetic nervous system, which is that relaxed, centered, chill part of us. So why don't we try that here for a minute? So I want you just to find a comfortable seat. And if you're okay closing your eyes, you can try closing your eyes. If you prefer to just kind of soften your gaze down on the table or the floor in front of you, you can do. Hey, if you have a window near you, look out the window for a minute. Sit up nice and tall. Then as you're ready, invite a soft breath in through your nose. Purse your lips and let the breath flow out of your mouth nice and slow. Just keep exhaling until you feel pretty empty. Inhale. Just about 3/4 of the way full. Long exhale. Just continue for a few more paces, a few more rounds at your own pace. Breathing in, knowing that you're breathing in. Breathing out, just being aware that you're breathing. Just let go of any control of the breath. And for a moment, just notice if you feel any shift or notice the effect of that breath. And this is a very simple practice that you can do at any point in the day, at any point you're feeling stressed. It's particularly potent practice to do while you're looking out the window or while you're about to go take a walk, maybe outside on your lunch break. Something you can do to transition into that mindful state in order to connect more with the land around you. This brings us into this idea of fascination attention. This is one of my favorite quotes on this subject. It's by Crowfoot, who was an orator of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Native American tribe. What is life? It is the flash of a firefly in the night. It is the breath of a buffalo in the wintertime. It is the little shadow which runs across the grass, loses itself in the sunset. What is life? Just these fascinating, beautiful little moments, these vignettes of life when you look out your window in the morning and there's that just first frost on the ground. You can see the million sparkles of the rising sun glistening off of frosted grass, or time that you look out your window and you see that red robin, or so that red cardinal bush outside your window. It's the one dot of red in the landscape. These are things that just naturally kind of fascinate us. Seeing a rainbow, beautiful colors of autumn, things that fascinate us, that draw us in very naturally. And this idea of fascination attention is really the work of Rachel and Stephen Kaplan, who I mentioned earlier. And they came up with this whole theory that they call attention restoration theory. And essentially what they said is that after a prolonged period of focus, very common for people to feel fatigued, to have your productivity decline. And what they were able to determine is that that's actually not caused by the focusing necessarily. It's caused by the practice of inhibiting distractions in order to focus. If you're trying to write like a long, complex email and you're getting, Facebook Messenger messages coming through and text messages, and somebody comes into your office asking you a question about tomorrow's meeting, and then somebody's calling you on your phone, and you have to try to inhibit all these things to try to get this done. And it's that inhibiting makes the frontal lobe of the brain very tired, and then leads to what they call directed attention fatigue. And here's the cool thing: the antidote for this, what I sometimes refer to as Zoom doom, is fascination attention. Now, fascination attention is when something catches our awareness and pulls us in. There's two kinds of fascination attention. It's hard fascination, soft fascination. Hard fascination is not what we're looking for. That would be you're looking out the window and a tree falls very dramatically in your backyard. You can't look away, but it kind of triggers that fight or flight response, or lightning, or something that triggers that fight or flight. It would be hard fascination. What we want is soft fascination. So an example of this would be sitting at the beach, watching the waves come in. Or if you've ever watched the wind just blowing through tall grass, like a field, wheat, goldenrod. Or even just like clouds, just blowing across a blue sky. These are examples of soft fascination. This is the antidote for Zoom doom. So if while you're at your desk, you can look up periodically and just look out the window and let your gaze go wherever it wants to go. And this is the thing with soft fascination: is you don't want to try to control your focus at all. This is like, you see a squirrel? Oh, cool, there's a squirrel. Oh, look, there's a robin. You just let your gaze go all over. That allows your mind to rest. After a few minutes of soft fascination, you can go back to what it is that you were working on. Okay? And this is really the antidote. So if you can set up your workstation by a window, it's going to be really ideal. Now, if you can't, it would be really great if you could have like a screensaver of a natural place and look at that. But looking out a window is the best. So green gazing is one option. If you have green space, if you can look out at trees, at an open field, anything green. Okay? If you have a plant or a terrarium in your office, a bonsai tree, these will be good things. But of course, we know not everybody has a green space to look at. You might be in an urban area, in an apartment. You might not be able to look out and see anything green. So in which case, it's sky swimming. Okay? Sky swimming, looking up at the blue sky, looking up at the clouds, letting your awareness just move over all the textures that are present in the sky. Right? If you think about as little kids, we probably used to lay outside and look up and try to make stories out of the clouds we were seeing in the sky. It's a very human thing to do, to let our attention wander over the landscape. As hunter-gatherers, we didn't have the luxury of not being present. When you're on the food chain, you don't have the luxury of not being mindful. You kind of have to be paying attention into what's going on. Looking up at the clouds, noticing what the weather's doing, listening to the birds. What are the birds saying about what's happening around? All of these things are very indigenous to who we are as human beings. So whether it's green gazing or sky swimming, these are two really restorative practices that can help you overcome Zoom doom. So that's the antidote for being on screens. That's the antidote for directed attention fatigue. Looking out the window, sky swimming, green gaze. Very powerful. For nature deficit disorder in general, there's a practice that I want to suggest to everybody the time we have remaining. This is something called the sit spot. And this really gets more at establishing a deeper relationship with the land that holds us. We think about it, it's the land that feeds us. It's the land that breathes us. It's the earth that sustains us. In his book, Last Child in the Woods, Lou asks this question, like, where will the future caretakers of the earth come from if children growing up today don't have a meaningful bond with place? And the best way to establish a meaningful bond with place is just to spend as much time exploring the land you live on as you can. So Bill McKibben has this wonderful quote. Mountain says you live in a particular place. Though it's a small area, just a square mile or two. It took me many trips to even start to learn the secrets. Here there are blueberries. Here there are bigger blueberries. Past 100 different plants along the trail, maybe 20. One could spend a lifetime learning a small range of mountains. Once upon a time. Love this one. One could spend a lifetime learning a small range of mountains. Once upon a time, people. Today, because so many folks are spending so much time inside and on technology, they just aren't forming those bonds with place. They don't know plants. They don't know the animals. I'm sure you've all heard some of these studies that show that children growing up today know far more corporate logos than they do plants or animals that live on the land they live on. Kids are learning about deforestation of the rainforests in the Amazon. They don't know anything about the woods behind their own house. Now, there's very little they can do to protect the Amazon, the rainforests in the Amazon. But there's a lot they can do to protect the woods behind their house. So this is referred to sometimes as place blindness or the wall of green. Folks might look out and they don't see the oak tree or the eastern hemlock or the fox or the cardinal. They might just see this wall of green that seems foreign and unknown to them. They might not see what's there at all. And this actually is an issue. And I can remember when, I don't know if you guys remember this, but when the Pokemon Go game came out on phones a few years ago, where folks would be kind of wandering around trying to find these Pokemons they could see them through their phones. I remember I was at a lake in the summertime and I saw these two young girls, probably 14, 15, and they walked right into the lake with their phones. I think they were trying to find a Pokemon character. They were not really aware of their surroundings. They just sort of were looking at their phone, walked right into the lake, right up to their chests. And they looked so confused and was, wow, okay. What's going on there? So 11 hours a day or more on a screen. These are powerful technologies. The most powerful way to begin to form a real deep connection with place is to start small. And I would say, start in our own backyard, start on our own fire escape, start, right where we live. This is a quote from Hassan Bushman that has become a really integral part of my work. And he said, that if one day I see a small bird and I recognize it, little thread forms between me and that bird. If I just see it, but I don't really recognize it, there's no thin thread. If I go out tomorrow and I see and I really recognize that same individual bird again, the thread will thicken, strengthen just a little bit. Every time I see and recognize that bird, the thread strengthens. Eventually, it'll grow into a string, and a cord, finally a rope. This is what it means to be a bushman. We make ropes with all aspects of the creation. We make ropes with all aspects of the creation this way. And the way we do this is by sitting out on the land. A practice that I call the sit spot. It's not just me who calls that, a lot of folks call it. And this is a practice where maybe you go in your backyard and you have your coffee in the morning. And maybe you just sit there and you just observe. Maybe you notice that you have a robin or a pair of robins in your backyard. That day after day, you realize that it's the same pair of robins. It's nesting back there. And you get to see how their day-to-day struggle for getting by and feeding their young, how it connects with the crows in the neighborhood, squirrels, all the common little creatures that are often overlooked. We get a window into their world if we spend a little bit of time just observing. This really connects to this whole idea of biophilia, species loneliness. E.O. Wilson, the famous biologist, coined the term biophilia, and he called it the urge to affiliate with other forms of life. Biophilia, love of life. It's this idea that as human beings, we just have this natural compulsion to be drawn to birds, bears, trees, other life forms. Just in us, it's innate. Biophilia. And species loneliness. This idea that we really can't be fully alive, we can't feel fully human if we don't have connection, relationship with other life forms on this planet, besides human beings. Luther Standing Bear basically said that if we lose respect for green growing things, we can't see the life in a plant, tree, respect the plant people, we'll soon lose respect for human people as well. Species. If you haven't read a book called Braiding Sweetgrass by Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer, I highly recommend it. She's a botanist, scientist, member of the Potawatomi tribe. And it's a book about her bringing together her scientific perspective with her indigenous perspective. It's a beautiful book. She refers to this state of isolation and disconnection, species loneliness. It's a deep, unnamed sadness stemming from estrangement from the rest of creation, loss of relationship. As our human dominance in the world has grown, I'm more isolated, more lonely, no longer call out toward. So one really powerful way to overcome nature deficit disorder is to draw closer to the world and the plants and the animals that live on the land that we live on. And topophilia is a term which refers to love of place, love of land, topography. And we all have some kind of a connection to the land that we live on. And I'm just going to skip ahead here, right to the sit spot practice. This is a practice that is very, very easy to do. And we won't do it here in the session tonight, but I want to offer it to you as something to consider experimenting with. It's a way to care for yourself and address some of these disconnections that might be present to some degree in your life. Sit spot is so easy and so simple. You just pick a spot that's close to where you live. It could be your back porch. It could be your front porch. It could be a park down the street. It might be your fire escape. It should be someplace that you can access easily at any time. It should be a place that you feel good. I like to pick a spot that gets the morning sun. Backyard. Get in the sun, feel warm, sit comfortably. You can have a chair, like a lawn chair or an Adirondack chair, or you might lean up against a tree or a stone. Totally up to you. And the practice is just to kind of center yourself and walk mindfully out to this place. And then you should try to be there for 15 minutes at minimum. The idea is to just sit and try to be as still as you can. Once you're there, to try to really limit your movement so that it's almost like you melt into the landscape. And as you become very still, the birds, the animals, they'll begin to kind of go back to their normal routine in that place as you're there. And your eyes are open in sit spot, and you're just observing movement, you're observing what's happening. And as you do this practice week after week, month after month, year after year, you'll begin to find yourself falling into and getting a glimpse of the rhythms, cycles, the players, the characters, the trends that are present on the land. You'll begin to form little threads between yourself and the birds that are there, squirrels that are there, crows that are there, the trees that are there, the grasses, flowers, the weeds, the rocks. And as time goes on, those threads will begin to thicken and strengthen. Eventually, they will become ropes. So, the reason why this is so important is because what we know now is that folks who go into caring for the earth careers, there was a study that was done, a sociological study some years ago, where people who were in these fields were asked, what do you attribute, going into these lines of work to? Caring for you, being an environmental attorney, environmental writer, whatever it might be. And across the board, they all said it was having long periods of unstructured free time in nature as children. It was when their grandfather took them fishing, when they built the tree house in the lot, playing in the creek, summer day. It's enough time to bond with a place. It's having that time. As adults, time isn't always that abundant, maybe in our lives, but 15 minutes while we're drinking our coffee, a few minutes at the end of the day, decompress, to look out the window, to rest our senses, it's doable. What's beautiful about it is that what it shows us is that it's actually love. It's actually love that fosters caretaking of place. It's not being shamed or guilted or scared into doing something for the earth. Those things don't really motivate people. What motivates people is love of place, of having connection to a stone, to a stream, to an ocean. It's that love, it's that bonding that really motivates us to step into the role of caretaker. And that's the work that I do as a mindful outdoor guide, guiding people in experiences while we walk on the land quietly. We have time for sit spot, we have time to talk, we have time to just be and sit by a stream, listen and pay attention for 20 minutes. And what's amazing is most adults just, when they come up here and I work with them and they have a little time to do that, it can be quite an emotional, powerful experience. But it's really something that it would be great if we could all do a little bit regularly. So that's my invitation for all of you, is to see if you can develop a sit spot practice where you live. And I'd love to hear, maybe at some point, how that was and how that is for you. If you want to learn more about that practice, you can certainly read my book, Rewilding. I write about it quite a bit. Or check out any of my programs that I'm offering. So I think I'm going to stop sharing now. Turn it over to Sierra, and happy to open it up for any questions or comments.
So if you do have any questions, you are more than welcome and invited to come off mute and ask your questions. You can put them in the chat as well. I'll be monitoring that and I can ask them to Micah as they come through as well.
Micah, is your screen off, your video off?
Yes, it is. Well, I'm turning it on now. Hi.
Thank you. I guess I have a comment. So I'm not a religious person, but I consider myself spiritual. And I've done some reading on sort of spirituality and sort of that importance of connection to something other than yourself, to things outside yourself, your world, to life outside yourself. And so nature has been really important to me because I have the structure religion has never worked for me to fulfill my sense of spirituality. And I worry about people not sort of, because people are naturally spiritual, that they're not having their spiritual needs fulfilled. And that could be part of it, is this disconnection from nature, which, as you eloquently explained, leads to disconnection from humans.
Yeah. It's a big concern of mine as well, especially with like things like the metaverse launching, and this seems to be this big push, and this I think on like a reckless movement into even more, deep like integration into alternate technological realms, right? Because it's what's needed right now, I think. Well, I don't know. How do I say this? I share your concern. And, I'll tell you something I notice a lot with folks when I'm out on the land with them is that just sitting outside and paying attention opens people to so much feeling. I can remember I had a woman take a course with me. We did a sit spot practice. I just said, hey, I invited them to go out and do the sit spot practice. And, 20 minutes they sat, they came back, and, she sat and she was near a large oak tree that had died, but it was still standing. And it was decomposing there as it stood. And when she saw that tree, she immediately thought of her father and grief that she was carrying about her relationship with her dad. And she had a very powerful experience, just sitting outside. Who would have known that that tree would elicit that response in her? And that seems to be the case, in so many ways. And the whole topic of eco-psychology is based on this idea, just most simply put, just that the human mind evolved in relationship to the natural world. And so when we're in contact with our natural habitat, it has an effect on us, and we make connections with things that we might not otherwise make connections with when we're in an artificial environment. It's one of the things that's most rewarding about what I do. I'm not a psychologist, but I just try to hold space to listen, if somebody brings something like that out of a sit spot experience. So one of the things we do is we do what's called counsel practice, which is when after folks come back from a sit spot, we'll just pass a stick or a rock around. Each person can share. Nobody comments. Nobody comments on it. Just a space where it can be spoken and heard. Even that practice in and of itself is such a powerful practice of just sitting in a circle, one person speaking at a time, being heard, having the opportunity to speak, which I consider an ancestral skill. Listening.
I would share something. Right in the beginning when we were doing, this is very, very beautiful and very relaxing. But right in the beginning when we were, before we had our breakouts, we were talking about, going back to your first relationship with nature. I hadn't thought about that place in a long time. It was like a really important place when I was like in the third grade or someplace in the woods behind the house on a hill. And now I can't stop thinking about it. I mean, it was, I live in a beautiful place too. I have a beautiful place. It's got wonderful energy, beautiful rocks, beautiful trees. But that place was the first place of the rocks and the trees, you know, big rocks, big trees, big view. It's really, really nice. So thank you. Thank you for bringing that back to the front. Yeah, it's lovely. I appreciate it.
Welcome. Yeah, thank you so much.
It's good.
Looks like there's a question. Denise, you're muted.
Thank you, Micah. I'm wondering what sort of Sarah just said and whether there's any programs for our youth, for our inner city youth that you know of that are developing. I know when my kids were young, there was a place called Nature's Classroom, and the children went for a week experience, you know, from the inner city schools and things to being outdoors and in cabins for the 5 days and with ponds and, you know, learning to make teas out of things. And it's just, I'm wondering, you know, you gave us an experiential understanding in the sharing of how important those very early experiences are that could almost plant the seeds to then be able to water throughout life.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you know of anything or any ways that we could get involved in that kind of thing in a active way.
Sure. I used to work in Nature's Classroom. Yeah. Yeah. That was a fun job with middle school kids. Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah. Used to work there in Groton, Mass, and up at Silver Bay and Lake George. Worked at Nature's Classroom. Super fun. Yeah, it's super important. You know, honestly, I think, you know, parents have, you know, the most important role, you know, in terms of that. Parents taking their kids out, you know, I would say not limiting exposure to smartphones for kids would be like incredibly important, in my opinion. You know, so whatever we can do to try to put off, knowing that. So I'll talk about programs in a second, but you know, knowing that these are designed to function like slot machines, right? You know, the more that parents can just give their kids a flip phone and make them suffer with that for as long as possible is going to have much more of a powerful effect than like any program, I think, because if a kid can get bored and they don't have this distraction to get sucked into, hopefully they're going to find something else to do outside. So I would say that's really, really important today. And I think, again, parents are the ones who have the most power to help forge an alternate path for children in that regard. And then I would say there are a ton of forest kindergartens popping up all around the country. There are a ton of nature connection programs where children learn ancestral skills. It's absolutely exploded around the country, where kids can learn, you know, wild edibles, caretaking, friction fire, tracking, all these indigenous skills. Programs are opening up all over the place. I would also say check out your local Audubon, your Connecticut Audubon chapters. A lot of the Audubon chapters are doing programming in the schools, and they're really, really great programs. We partner with Mass Audubon for our School for Mindful Outdoor Leadership, and their naturalists come and teach, and they're really wonderful. The other thing I would say too is well, what I was going to say was one project I really enjoy doing is learning about ancestry. first off with kids, like learning about who's indigenous to the land that they're living on, and then learning about our own indigenous ancestry. As a man of European descent, I know that I have ancestors who were at one time indigenous in Europe, and learning as much as I could about what they were like and what their land was like before Romans colonized, Great Britain and Ireland, things like that. Like these are great practices and things for kids to learn about. So I'm kind of rambling, I think, at this point, but I think it's a good question. And that's my best shot in the answer. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think you can, the whole phone thing is one that I'm really kind of thinking a lot about these days. I'm thinking a lot about it. I'm really concerned about the metaverse and the phones with young people. And I think that, just to go back to, I'm sure a lot of us, I think a lot of us would probably say, I would venture to guess most of our parents probably didn't put us in nature connection programs as kids. I think most of us told us, go outside, don't come back in, drink out of the hose, and come back when the lights come on in the street. And I think we overthink it a lot of times with our kids. It's like they just need to get out there, and we need to let them take some risks and learn how to take healthy risks. And I think that's one of the.
But Mike, I think that's part of the problem is that parents are so fearful now. Like when I grew up, my parents had a dinner bell that was attached to the back door, and they would ring it. They had no idea where we were. we were out in fields. We were in a friend's house. We were doing whatever the hell. Sometimes getting into mischief, but they would ring the dinner bell, and we knew it was time to come home. You could hear it all around the neighborhood. But now people are so full of fear that they want to know where their kids are all the time. They'd rather they be at home, on the computer or on their phones. And I, when my kids grew up, my kids are adults now. All this technology was relatively new, and it was a new phenomenon for me and a challenge. Like, how do I raise kids? My daughter, who got a phone younger than my son did, it was like an appendage. For me to take her phone away, it was like I was cutting off an arm. It was hell to go through. And talk about being present. You can't be present when you've got text coming in every few seconds. It's a real problem.
I mean, I struggle with it. I'll be the first to admit I'm addicted to my phone. No question. And I'm 45 years old and have some experience. I can't imagine what it would have been like for me at 14, access to this. I'm barely I can barely manage it now. Yeah, Sandy.
Thank you. What about folks who live in the inner city, like say you're in the Bronx and you're not in a housing project, and I know you can look out the window, but those kids, I had a Fresh Air Fund kid who lived with us for quite a while over the years from the Bronx, and she 3 times when she was growing up, she had gotten a bicycle, and 3 times within a week it was stolen, and then they stopped getting her a bicycle. And this was a while ago, but when she came to stay with us, she was so terrified of the woods, and just like, I'm actually not much of a city. I'm not comfortable in cities. And so I wonder about these kids. And lots of times is economic barriers to, sending people somewhere for something. And it's not necessarily safe to go to the park. I mean, there's true safety issues.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's not an easy one to solve, is it?
Oh.
No. Those little things. Yeah, so I always offer, to put a bird feeder on in your fire escape, something along those lines. Have plants in your apartment.
Yes.
Have plants, very, very important. Have a pet, You know, if you can have a pet of that species, interspecies connection, that's helpful. That's important. You know, one of the benefits of urban life is people living in cities walk more than folks who live in rural areas generally. So that's often overlooked. And they get more steps in. You got to walk everywhere. You can't drive everywhere. But yeah, it's a really big issue, and it's not an easy one to solve. It's very complex because these are big structural. You know, you live in a housing project and there's concrete everywhere. It's not an easy thing to solve for.
Yeah.
You know, and a lot of it obviously has to do with like urban planning and things like that. And there's some, you know, I think things happening there. But yeah, it's a good question. Wish I had a better answer for it.
Yeah, well, still some good thoughts there. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Mary.
Yes, thank you, Micah, for such a wonderful presentation. And I think on that note of, you know, the whole concept of technology being inevitable, and I agree with that, but I think things like surveillance capitalism and the metaverse are not necessarily inevitable. And the difficulty of navigating this in our very monetized world where it's just moving so quickly and so rapidly, and it hasn't really been fully evaluated for safety, et cetera. Where I'm going with this is that I think having communities of dialogue like we're doing tonight to share the research that's emerging and then really being able to publish and connect with our communities, community outreach, so that this information about what we're learning from research studies about how nature and being connected with nature in whatever way can work in your community and encouraging that is so critical, because people are not really hearing or understanding what a major impact it has. So yeah, so on that note, hopefully we can, be sharing resources and continue to bridge to community as well, to work with across a lot of disciplines, education, conservation. As a family physician and as someone interested in holistic and integrative medicine and practices, this is becoming quite an important topic in the area of, say, holistic integrative medicine. And so I'm really so pleased. And it's, of course, as you know so well, probably it's really taking off, nature and health and the integral nature of all of that. So I'm hopeful that as we bring research forward on this, it will be helpful. I'd like to share just when the pandemic began in 2020, I just knew that our medical and dental students here at UConn, University of Connecticut, were just, on the screen, all the time. So I put together a little elective for them outdoors, bringing them outdoors. And 3 hours a day for 5 days. It was 1 week long elective. And the impact was incredible. I didn't have any type of really great quantitative or qualitative research tools, but the general feedback and just that, some of them that were wearing Fitbits and things like that were noticing their heart rate, their blood pressure were so much better than any other time in their lives. So just knowing how this can impact even a small amount of time. And so, hopefully we're going to get that written up and published and presented and shared so that it will help others develop similar programs for the incredible amount of stress that students and others are under. So anyways, so yes, research important, sharing it, doing it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. I love the term surveillance capitalism. I hadn't heard that before, so I jotted that down.
Yeah, it's rather actually depressing. I mean, some of this is like you can get so like the cat's already out of the bag, you know.
I know.
But when you become aware and you share this with others, and be able to communicate with language that yeah, technology is inevitable, but surveillance capitalism is not, you know. And this whole idea that democratizing information and being able to you know, be together in this virtual platform as we are tonight is a blessing. And yet this, as people say, like nature, the undefended territory of internet, you know, commercialism or whatever. And as you said, you know, the device is like a slot machine. They're designed that way. We know that. But there was a Harvard professor who wrote a book in 2019 called Surveillance Capitalism. Zuboff is her last name. And it's quite the tome, but it really is extremely well researched. I just think that there's, again, it's like there's a lot of monetized interest in that and letting these technologies kind of run wild, and let alone the impact on our environment. So I think that going back to that idea of when you start to even very small amount of building a relationship with the natural environment, you then cannot disregard it. You you have a relationship with. If you have that, like that beautiful quote by the Bushman, you start to have a relationship, and therefore you can care for it. And I think that's what will be our hope. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate everybody hanging in with me for this whole time tonight, and I know it's the end of the day. So I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity to be here, learn with you, and share some of my thoughts. So, Sierra, I really appreciate you reaching out and inviting me to be here with everybody. It's just been a real pleasure.
Thanks so much. It has been really wonderful.
Oh, thank you so much. Okay. Have a great evening, everybody. Thanks. I'll see you later.